So let's talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You first mentioned eating disorders. From your understanding or from your experience, I understand this is what influenced your decision on what PhD you wanted to pursue. But before that, there's something that must have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us more about that?
Right. So I think throughout this discussion, I've kind of given you some idea as to like my upbringing and, what I was exposed to as a child. I think one of the things I also want to kind of emphasize is that, when it came to like family dynamics and things like that, my parents were actually not the stereotypical South Asian parents who are absolutely strict and want me to get good grades. That was something that I kind of imposed on myself because that's what I thought I had to do as a South Asian woman.
Like, who told you? What made you?
Right. It was actually just things I kind of, absorbed from my environment. For example, I remember as a young kid in, maybe third grade, 8 years old, my mom had a friend who was white, and she saw me, and the first thing she said was, "Oh, she must be so good in math. You Indians are, really good at math." And, comments like that, while they're supposed to make you feel good, or you think they're supposed to make you feel good, it puts an immense amount of pressure on someone who hears that. And, you hear that, and then you see, movies and TV shows that always have that, brown character, that South Asian character who's like the smart character, who is, the brainy character, the nerdy character. Especially in the early 2000s, that was the running stereotype. You internalize that. And, of course my parents wanted me to get good grades. They were never really strict about it once I got older because they knew I was going to get them because they saw an overachieving, girl. They saw an overachieving daughter who had no issue with sitting down and doing her work and doing whatever she could to get those grades. But what they didn't see was the internal turmoil. They didn't see how anxious calculus was making me. They did not see how, the stress of an upcoming physics exam was keeping me awake at night. No one saw that until I told them later on in my life. And so when I look back and think about how my eating disorder manifested, I did, my mom, had her own mental health issues, and that's something that my family and I had to deal with. And I think a topic for maybe another story, but that was something I had to deal with growing up, kind of managing that and kind of working around that. But, in high school, I started to feel that kind of pressure because I had my hopes set on a really top university in California. I had teachers in high school telling me, "Oh, you'll get in. You're like the best student I've ever had in my class. It's going to be no issue." And the day that I opened up an email that I wasn't expecting so soon told me otherwise. Once I read that this dream university of mine was not going to expect me or accept me, I was just in tears. I had an emotional breakdown. I was, rolling on the kitchen floor, just sobbing, crying. I could just feel like my body was being purged or something because I mean, as a young child, even though I was in my teens, I just had no control over how I felt. I also felt like at that moment I had no control over my environment, just in the household and my family, in where I wanted to go to school and how I wanted people to see me. All of that was manifesting into that kind of emotional breakdown that day. And I remember, that was like right before the Christmas holidays, kind of going into the Christmas holidays, just feeling very numb, having no feeling. That was like my first instance of dealing with something like that. And I remember as I went into the new year, 2010, I I remember kind of just like staring at the back of like a box of chocolates and just kind of looking at the calories and looking at the nutrition label and just thinking to myself, well, I can control this. I can control how much calories I put in my body. I can control, how I want to look, and I didn't, at the time, I didn't connect that to an eating disorder. I just connected it to something as something in my environment that I could finally have control over. And, obviously that led to something a little bit more dangerous. It led to a lot more psychological issues than I ever would have imagined. And even though it did kind of direct me on a path professionally to, where I am today, it was a series of years, and that it was a experience that impacted some very formative years of my life. When you think about going to college, when you think about graduating from high school and starting the next chapter of your life, you want to think that you have those years be good. I hear a lot of people talk about how college was one of the best times of their life. For me, it was the absolute opposite. I was absolutely depressed. I don't have any close friends from college. I just remember just staring at the clock, wondering when I could have my next meal, which wasn't even that substantial of a meal. To this day, I can look at an apple, I can look at a piece of bread, and because of all those years memorizing calories, I know exactly how many calories, a piece of food has. It's just something that will never go away, because that is what literally consumed my life for 6 years. And I often joke when people ask me, oh, well, who were your friends in college? I'll say, the brand of, a snack I used to eat all the time, or I'll say, apples and yogurt or something, just to kind of put some humor in that. But, my relationship was with, and so my relationship was with food and only food. And it also impacted my relationship with my dad, for example. In my relationship with my mom, I can't really, it was very difficult just based on other circumstances with mental health. But, with my dad, I think when I talk to him now, he would comment on the fact that he would see me, in a form that he had never seen me before, physically and emotionally. And he just felt so helpless by the fact that he could not help me until I was ready to help myself. And
what do you mean physically?
Right, because, obviously when you go through something like an eating disorder, it really impacts your body. And one of the manifestations is how you look physically. And so when I was going through my eating disorder, I still thought, my legs looked big. I still thought, my hips were wide. But then when I look back on the pictures of myself during that time, I was almost a skeleton. I had sticks for legs. I, think back to my weight at the time. It was significantly low. I mean, I won't say the number because those kind of numbers can be triggering for someone who is struggling with that. But it was not good. I mean, I think if I had dipped 5 pounds lower than that number, I could have ended up in the hospital for other reasons. An eating disorder is also just not weight loss. It's also, it impacts, your hair growth. I was starting to see, pitting, so holes, and not holes, but just, pits in my teeth. I was starting to get cold. Even when it was hot outside, I would want to have like a jacket on. Just very weird symptoms. I had an instance of, bladder issues. Maybe it's an embarrassing thing to say, but I'll say it. But I was having trouble keeping my urine in, just simply stated like that. It's a very serious disease that not a lot of people take seriously. I think, in this day and age, we're becoming more aware of it. I think people are starting to understand the importance of mental health and its manifestations, and how especially influential it can be at certain times in someone's life. But I think when I was going through it, there was really nowhere to tell anyone, or no one to really tell of it to, because it just seemed like it was something, number one, it seemed like it was something I initially wanted to do when I first started off, but then at the same time, it was something I knew that this wasn't good to me. This was not the answer, and I knew this was something that I needed help getting out of. I just didn't know how to ask for it, and I was afraid to ask for it, because at the same time, this, like I said earlier, this was something I had control over. The one thing in my life I had control over, and did I really want to give that up? At the time, no. Yeah, so I think people who have experience will completely understand what I'm trying to say. But for those who don't, or for those who, or for the first time are hearing about an eating disorder, it is something that is just as serious as someone having an addiction, or someone going through depression or bipolar, and at times all of these things can be related. It's not just one or the other, it's a whole spectrum of disorders related to mental health.
So you weren't eating?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to talk more about how an eating disorder is defined, there can, it's not just not eating something. It can be, just controlling how much you eat. For me, it was just obsessively controlling how much I ate. And, I was so obsessed with calories, and I won't disclose how many calories I ate, because again, it can be triggering, but it was a very low number, very low. So for me, sometimes I wouldn't even eat healthy foods. I would eat, cereal, and just binge on cereal up until a certain number of calories I allowed myself for the day, because I was so obsessed with meeting that number and not going over that number. Other people that experience eating disorders, like you said, they may not eat at all. They may eat only foods they consider healthy. That's something called orthorexia. Or another form of eating disorder is bulimia, where someone actually looks like they're eating. It looks like they're eating a lot of food, but then they may find ways to purge it or get rid of that food through, other ways. So eating disorder in itself is a whole spectrum as well. And that's something that I think people are starting to finally realize and actually pay attention to, and actually research. I think if you were to go to PubMed and look for the latest research in this field, it's taken a lot more seriously than it once was. And so I think that's very promising to see.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
So how did you get out of it? How do you ask for help? How do you deal with it? If it's dealing, I don't know. Yeah.
To be honest with you, when I was going through it, I remember telling my dad during one of our conversations, I don't think I'm ever going to recover from this. I think this is going to be a part of me for the rest of my life. I don't see myself getting out of this. That was something I was absolutely sure of. For me, when you think about mental health and you think about someone going through or struggling with it, they have to find their reason to get out of it themselves. You can try to force them out of it. You can try to find ways to help them out of it, but nothing is going to change until they are ready to change. And for me, that happened when I realized that there were people around me who I knew were recovering. I actually found out about them through social media in the early days, and I learned about their journey. So there were a lot of young girls around my age who were documenting their journey of eating disorder recovery. And I think in order to convince myself that I would be okay, that I wouldn't balloon up and I wouldn't explode or, something crazy, just in my eating disorder mind, I would kind of watch their journeys and, read about methods that they use to kind of eat more and kind of get out of the mental state they were in. And I think part of me saw this, and part of me, the practical part of me, was able to kind of tell myself that if they can do it, and they're still healthy, they still look normal, why not you? What makes you different from them? If you were to do exactly what they did, what happened to them should happen to you in some way. Nothing crazy should happen out of it. So I actually, mimicked what they were doing in the sense that I would start adding more food to my day, allowing myself more calories in a day, very slowly in the beginning, adding little by little. And I think when I started doing that, my body was almost, just screaming, yes, give me more, give me more. And it was a very scary feeling because I just felt this constant hunger for months. And, it was very scary because I felt like, oh my gosh, like, is my body going to just take all this food and I'm going to store it and I'm going to be fat and whatever, those thoughts that come up. But what happened was, it was almost like once I reached a healthy weight, my body was able to kind of, work with what I gave it and start to kind of fix itself. For example, going back to the symptoms I was experiencing, my bladder, I didn't have any more issues with that. I think once I gave myself the proper nutrition, I was able to kind of let my body go back to normal. The only issue I had at the time was my mental recovery. One thing that a lot of people experience once they recover from their eating disorder physically, so once they reach a healthy weight, they still have to do the work to be happy with their body. So for me, I would still look at the mirror. I would be obsessing over the scale and over my weight. And, seeing that my weight was much higher than it once was, and also actually much higher than it was when I was a healthy teenager, for example. And that really did scare me. I was retaining water in my body. I was bloated a lot of the time. And I had to remind myself that these are normal symptoms when you're recovering from an eating disorder. This is what happens when your body, has been given actual food, enough food to sustain itself after a very long time. And it's going to take some time for your body to find its normal again. And so, like I said, when I was watching these other girls' journeys, I tried to convince myself that my body would find its way once again. And, after about 6 months for me, I think my body kind of stabilized to a normal weight. I was kind of working with a therapist as far as, recovering mentally and trying to find peace with my body and peace with what I was seeing in the mirror. And I think looking back, I would say that from the time I started my recovery with eating more calories to the time I was able to look in the mirror and say, I'm happy with who I am, took about 2 years. It really did, I think. And if I had not seen a therapist, if I had not taken the time to work on my mental health and my mental recovery, it could have taken longer. It's anything to do with mental health. If you are going through something like an eating disorder or depression or anxiety, or you are someone who is prone to developing something like that, if you let it go and treat it for a very long time, it can be very damaging. But that doesn't mean you're never going to recover from it. It just means that you need to take time to prioritize that. It's gonna mean, maybe seeing a therapist for, an indefinite amount of time. I think throughout my journey, I've seen about 4 therapists in my life, for different reasons. My first therapist was to help me get out of my eating disorder and recover. My second one was kind of an intermediate therapist. My third therapist was helping me towards the end of my PhD and kind of helping me, get ready for my postdoc. And my fourth therapist was actually in Italy when I was going through the hard time during my postdoc, and she was kind of helpful in that period of my life. So
do you want to talk about that?
talk about
Your experience.
experiencing with the.
Because you also mentioned something to do with depression. You're doing your postdoc.
Right. I was saying earlier, for someone who is prone to developing these types of issues with mental health, it's absolutely important to know where you can get help and how you can get support. And therapy, depending on your situation, can be incredibly helpful, especially if you have a therapist who absolutely understands you and your situation.
So that means there are some who might not understand, and it's important to seek who might.
Exactly. Because, not all therapists are the same. Some people work differently. From the 4 therapists I've seen in my life, the one I had help in the beginning, my first one who helped me get out of my eating disorder, I absolutely, think back to her and think of how much help she was to me, because she was trained to help someone like me get out of an eating disorder. And so I think her skills, her empathy was what I needed at the time. Versus, let's say, my 3rd therapist, who was a little bit more direct, a little bit more to the point. There were times where she was actually a little bit biased in what she said, and we actually ended up kind of having a little bit of a debate politically about things, which is, it really depends on the person. Some people, I think a therapist shouldn't bring in their personal opinions into the room, especially if that is their profession, to be as unbiased as possible. But there are therapists like that, so it really depends on what you're looking for and how you interact with someone, because at the end of the day, therapists are people too. They have the training to be a resource, but they have personalities, they have opinions, and sometimes it's hard to completely stop them from showing up. So these are all things to keep in mind. And, going back to thinking of a PhD student, someone who is in their PhD and going through, stress, going through pressure, it's incredibly important to have someone there to support you if you feel like you need it. And that's not to say you need one for every day for the rest of your life or every week for the rest of your life. For me, when I had the therapist at the moments of my life that I needed it, it was good for that moment. And actually, every time I concluded with a therapist, I actually felt good about where I was in life. And so you can go through life and have moments where you need someone like that. And you can go through life and feel good about where you are and feel like you don't need someone like that. It really depends on, where you are in life and, how good your life is and how good your environment is. And if you're struggling, then maybe seeing a therapist again or for the first time could help you find tools and figure out a direction of, how you can reorient yourself to a place that you are feeling good about yourself again.